Hello, everyone, and welcome to Health and Happiness at Work. This podcast is for busy working adults trying to figure out how to better take care of themselves and others. My name is Katie, and I will be your host. We are here today because adulting is hard and because busy working adults spend more time at work than anywhere else. We're going to have real conversations about real life and, most importantly, swing into action on the biggest opportunities. We're going to talk about ways to layer health, fitness, and wellness directly into your workday so that you feel fantastic. I cannot wait to dive deeper into each of these topics related to health and happiness. You are not alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3. I am pumped to be here today because we have our first in-studio guest. More on that in just a minute. So our last episode was all about engagement, and we explored the many reasons why people do or don't engage with life or work. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to that, I encourage you to do so. And at the end of that episode, I teed us up for where we are headed this month. I think it makes sense for us to continue an exploration of people and behavior and what makes them feel safe and secure and set up for success. So we are going to dive into the topic today of mental health and more specifically psychological safety. Two topics that are very much trending across communities and workplaces. And I know my guest will agree, this is a beautiful thing. There's a little mystery. I should have introduced you by now. I'll get to that. But for many years, we've been hopeful that mental health would become more common language, more commonplace in terms of normalizing it, talking about it, etc. So anyways, I am so grateful that we as a culture are speaking more openly and frequently about mental health and social emotional well-being. And so this leads me to a very exciting introduction. Our first guest is mental health specialist, Laura Ewer. Laura, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I didn't realize I was your first in-person guest, so.
Yeah, I'm tired of hearing myself. No, actually, I just felt like I needed to get a little bit of experience in this whole podcast space and kind of set the tone for what we're here and what we're talking about. But it's time. It's totally time.
Yeah.
And I think it'll make this year really fun and meaningful. So let's start with telling everyone just a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe the work you're doing today and how that's different than where you started.
Sounds good. Well, I'm a licensed independent social worker, and I'm a school social worker. So for the past about 20 years, I've worked in the schools as the mental health specialist. I did individual and group therapy, and I trained staff on things like crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and awareness and trauma-informed care. Now I kind of shifted. I do a lot of psychotherapy with clients. So my main area of focus is trauma treatment and using neuroscience and attachment theory to treat and heal. And I'm so happy and honored to be with Wellness Collective. I develop educational sessions on anything mental health related, and I work on presenting and speaking and just bringing mental health kind of to the masses, which I think is an amazingly beneficial element of what we do, is that we can take mental health and really disseminate the information to a large quantity of people,
Right.
which is like critical.
Right. And what's super cool is that we're able to, I think, bridge a little bit of a gap.
Right.
So we live in an era and a time where there are wait lists and it's hard for people to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
So people might take many weeks or months or years to actually seek out treatment or help, and they might be suffering alone or in silence, and then they finally get to yes on getting some help, but then there's a wait list. So what we're seeing is that employers are looking at mental health a little bit differently, and they're wanting to reduce barriers to care, and they want to bridge that gap. And then we're also hearing from employers who need help handling certain situations. They
Right.
want to handle it well and in excellence and take care of their employees, and they're not sure what to do when employees are coming forward and being a little bit more vulnerable, which is amazing. But then I think sometimes employers don't know what to do with that information. And so I think we can be a really supportive partnership
Right.
for that.
Because information is powerful. So just understanding kind of what we are experiencing and kind of putting a label to that and knowing kind of how to seek those resources is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I get to talk about this all day, every day.
It's so amazing.
So this is not our first appearance together. I'll put it that way. Not our first rodeo. So we put our heads together pretty often and talk about what we're hearing and what we're seeing.
Right.
So I will hear often from workplaces or organizations about the problems they're trying to solve and how they're trying to help people. Laura hears some of that, but then she also hears from individuals what they're navigating.
Right.
So we oftentimes put our heads together and say, what are we hearing and how can we use this to inform our work and our solutions and the types of services that we put out into the world so that it's relevant and meaningful. And with that, we've really come across some themes that I think are interesting to put on the table, and that will kind of kick off where we're headed with the balance of this conversation. So the workday has changed is really what Laura and I were talking about. And it sounds dramatic to say forever changed, but I do strongly believe the workday is forever changed.
Right.
There was so much inflexibility with workdays previously. And not to brag on myself, but I'm going to do it a little bit. I used to really champion a flexible workday.
Right.
Because I knew that adults needed some options to, number one, be able to take care of themselves and participate in the types of programs that I offer. But number two, to just flex and take care of their families. And the workday had been somewhat rigid, and particularly so in some industries. And it was like a hard no if somebody wanted to work from home. So I think we can agree that that has changed, and that's sort of a silver lining moment. But as with anything in life, it doesn't make it flawless or perfect or easy. There's people that really love it and people that maybe really struggle or feel isolated or disconnected. And it's been hard. One major theme that we're hearing and seeing is that there are way fewer moments of transitional time in the workday and fewer natural breaks. People used to get in their cars and commute and go to sales meetings, and it was just a really different day. And now we're in those back-to-back meetings with like no transition time between virtual meetings. So there is a lot of concern about technology and how technology and just the pace or demand of the workday is negatively impacting mental health.
Right.
So we'll look at that. We're also talking about how the workday is more personal. And Laura actually brought this up when we were preparing for another session. She said the workday is so much more personal. And she went on to say work from home gives you a window into people's lives. And I was like, ooh, yes, it does. It gives you a camera into their bedroom sometimes.
Right.
You know, they're taking like a Zoom or a Teams meeting from their master bedroom, and it's kind of weird. And you see where and how people live, and you see their animals and their children, and you see their doorbells ringing. You don't see the doorbell ringing, but you hear it ringing, and then you see the aftermath of that, and they're apologizing because it's chaotic in their house. And it is more intimate, and with that probably comes some other things that people are navigating. We've seen that some routines, either personal routines or professional routines, are maybe out the window. You know, that idea of gathering around the water cooler. Like, what's the virtual equivalent of that?
Right.
You know, you can't replace that. And I'll never forget when I started talking to a group of employees, a couple of people said, wow, you inspired me to go shower.
Or get a massage.
Yeah. Like, we hear these aha moments from employees who sort of either abandoned self-care or abandoned their basic hygiene on a typical work morning because life was so different for a couple of years. And now with work from home just being more normal, people have more options for how the beginning of their day unfolds. And what we know about routine, and I'll let Lara elaborate on this, is that it's comforting. I know I can say and be vulnerable that when I go on vacation, sometimes I'm
Right.
super anxious, which doesn't make sense, but it's because I'm off my routine and I have a lot of time with my thoughts.
Yes.
And it's a bit much to be in
Right.
Katie's brain. So what
It's
do you want to...
unpredictable.
Yeah.
And our brain craves predictability because it's soothing to the system from a biological standpoint. It's soothing to us from an environmental standpoint. So any type, even the most basic routines, it helps alleviate anxiety. So that's what we're seeing.
So one takeaway I've had kind of going down a rabbit hole is that even when I travel or go on vacation, I try to keep the favorite parts of my routine,
Right.
so that I have structure and form to my day, because it does keep me more steady. So consider what routines, might be supportive to your
Right.
colleagues and your teams and your friends and your family. Routines matter. So I'm kind of
Yes.
going down a rabbit hole, but I think that's worth talking about.
Yes.
And then just finally, last couple of themes here, and this is backed up by data. The workday is proven to be longer. I think the last stat I read said about 28% longer in terms of minutes or hours of work. And employees will share things with me like, my work's right there, or
Right.
I hear the notification and there's a real tough time disconnecting from that. So the final theme is boundaries are really blurred. So boundaries are blurred in the sense that we're looking inside people's homes
Right.
and people feel the need to be on or on demand or working more minutes of the day. And so obviously there's a cost from a physical health perspective. Another trend we're seeing is that people feel like their waistline has changed a little bit the last couple of years.
Yeah.
People have more access to their kitchens and grazing and
Well, snacking, that has come up multiple times with both
Yeah.
clients and when I do educational sessions. It's like, I need help to control the snacking, which is such a simple thing that you would not think has a major impact, but it does. And so at one point I was talking for like 20 minutes on other options and alternatives to snacking.
yeah, it's just convenient
Right.
and multisensory and
Yes.
tastes good, feels good. And we could do a whole deep dive on the,
Sensory aspect, the oral sensory aspect of snacking.
and the brain craving it and it kind of
Right.
being this quick fix. And it's really tough. So I am seeing this trend toward intuitive eating and people wanting to learn that so
Right.
that they can manage their eating habits. But that's another day, another topic. So anyways, there's kind of this physical piece or challenge that people are navigating, but then mental health, social, emotional.
Yes.
This could probably be a 52-part series.
Oh, yeah.
And
Easy.
yes, and that's what we're learning when we work with different organizations and workplaces is it goes so many different directions, from
Yes.
empathy to compassion to fatigue and burnout to de-escalation to
Right.
suicide prevention and awareness. And
Right.
we're going so many different directions and it feels really, really good and meaningful. So again, today we just kind of dip our toe in the water
Yep.
with a few topics. So is there anything else before I shift gears, Lara, that you're seeing as an emerging pattern aside from the snacking habit? Anything else?
Well, I think that a major kind of takeaway that we need to remember is that, changing this or the shift of routine or the way we kind of do work, I'm quoting, do work, it tends to be easier and more manageable for those of us who are healthy in our mental health and physical health. It gets more challenging for those of us who struggle with our mental health. And then we're like, we have to think about how to support those because it's such an individualized experience. And we have to reach out and provide information and resources for those of us who do struggle.
And I think it's common when you are navigating a challenge to have this sense or belief that you're the only one.
Right.
You're the only one navigating this situation, circumstance, decision.
It's very isolating.
And shame is a whole nother
Yes.
topic that obviously Brene Brown is an expert on.
Uh-huh.
But again, I think people personalize it, right? I'm the
Yes.
only one going through this. People don't really understand.
Yes.
But if we could speak a little bit more openly, and again, it's not about telling the world your secrets. It's just about sharing at a high level.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm having a hard time right now.
Yes. And research shows that people want to talk about it. But they need to have a safe space to do that. And that's another training, or another piece of training, is that we want to teach employers and organizations, corporations, on how to create that safe space. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yes, and we'll get into that later today too.
Right.
But I can remember Laura and I were in a meeting in a workplace saying like, oh, I don't know. It seems kind of uncomfortable for people to be talking about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's a really big difference to say, hey, everybody, please be patient with me. I'm doing the best I can. I'm working through something. And to give that high level I statement.
Right.
Versus, let me tell you about all of my diagnoses and medications and health history. We're not suggesting you put everything out there for your colleagues to know, but there's a way to share in such a way that it builds bonds and rapport and trust and all of that.
Yes.
I just caught myself really talking with my
hands.
Like,
it was beautiful, Katie.
Oh my gosh. I was like, why are my arms stretched wide like I'm making a rainbow right now? But for your entertainment, I'm very animated.
She is.
Okay, so back to where we were. So we went through how the workday has changed, and that leads us to what people are navigating and experiencing as a result.
Mm-hmm.
So the first item on the list is burnout.
Right.
How would you describe burnout?
It's an emotional exhaustion. It's overwhelmingly work-related, where you feel stuck, trapped, overwhelmed. Confidence and motivation are low. And there's a new term called quiet quitting. And that's essentially what burnout is that you end up doing the bare minimum because you are so overwhelmed and emotionally exhausted and physically exhausted. Even though your habits haven't changed, you're getting enough sleep, that level of support isn't there at work.
So I know many employers have burnout on their radar.
Right.
Because they're bringing it up as a concern.
Yes.
And I have met a couple of workplaces that have set some boundaries about after work hours because they want to pause the workday and encourage people to step away and have that space.
Right.
So fortunately, I think it is on folks' radar. The other themes that we're seeing are around isolation and disconnection. And what's kind of wild about this one is if you look at the data about communication touch points and how frequently people are communicating now as a result of all these different virtual platforms and social media platforms, like people are more connected socially and they're more connected technologically than they have ever been.
Yes.
However, people continue to feel isolated, disconnected, compared, alone. Again, there are a lot of specific diagnoses I know that increase with consumption of social media and technology, things like ADHD, anxiety, and depression.
Yes.
Anything else you want to add about isolation and disconnection?
Well, I definitely think it's all interrelated. So when we see kind of higher levels of burnout, that leads to people feeling isolated and disconnected. I think sometimes isolation is a defense mechanism where they have to kind of withdraw to really take care of themselves. And you get into topics of like personality and temperament. It all is interrelated. So we definitely see more disengagement, but it's critical because attachment and feeling supported and secure and safe all helps that engagement and feeling like you have that social support. So it's critical that there are critical or key factors that we can, and skills that we can practice to increase that feeling of attachment and connectedness. So I think we need to go there.
Yeah, and I think what's tricky is that it's not a one size fits all, or
Yes.
this is always the right way to intervene. Here's an example. I was reading an article this morning. I think it was a Psychology Today article, our favorite,
Yes.
about differentiation.
Yes.
And it was talking about adults having this moment of, I picture like hands on hips. I need to take care of myself.
Yes.
And I need to do life my way, my terms.
Yeah.
And they sort of disconnect from maybe a significant other or disconnect socially a little bit because it's like they're finally pissed off enough to put themselves first. And they're tired of not living a life that feels like me and authentic.
Yes.
And so I thought, ooh, that's interesting. So it sounds like sometimes when people pull away, it might be because they're processing and sorting through something.
Right.
But I think what we're talking about is when people isolate chronically.
Yeah.
And don't have groups of people to lean on, that becomes a bit of a risk factor.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Huge.
Another trend are these feelings of guilt or shame. So we already touched on shame a little bit, but the interesting thing about guilt is that Laura and I are hearing people express guilt over self-care. Like, hey, I've been stepping away for lunch each day and walking my dog and listening to a podcast, which is like, yay, good job. That sounds amazing. But then they'll report, and I felt really guilty about it.
Yes.
And I felt really bad about it. And so the question becomes, why? And I think there's this pressure to be, quote unquote, on at work. Productive.
Yeah.
Yes. Everybody's watching.
Yes.
They're watching to see if you're there when I am. And so there's this pressure to be on. And I think there's a lot of comparison too. So I will hear people say things like, I wanted to step away from my desk, but my colleague doesn't. I know for a fact my colleague doesn't. And if they're comparing my work to their work, maybe I look a little more distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And so Laura and I are like face palming because this isn't our hope for people.
Yeah.
Our hope for people is that they can take breaks and do so confidently and feel like $1 million as a result.
Mm-hmm.
But people are reporting feelings of guilt even for healthy choices.
Yeah. And what I see specifically for my clients that I provide therapy to is that it has a lot to do with our childhood experiences and the kind of the family rules we had when we grew up. And that has a direct impact on our feelings of guilt and shame, specifically because our workday has shifted so much and we're still navigating the new. And so I think that that's another area, is that we're still kind of uncertain, even though it's been a while that we've been in this work from home setting or, a blended version of that. So yeah, that has a lot of impact.
That makes sense because I've heard that should talk.
Yes.
Like I should do this, I should do that, is really outside pressure to behave or do things a certain way because of a certain ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And I anticipate that does get instilled at home. Like I shouldn't play until I get all my work done, or I shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that because of different expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So that totally makes sense. All right. Depression and anxiety are very prevalent regardless of what year it is.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's spoken about more, which is important.
Yes. You have to celebrate that.
Yeah. So anxiety and depression, but then you were sharing with me also a theme of distorted body image. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I honestly think it comes from virtual platforms. We're finally seeing ourselves, and many of us have a hard time with that. No matter what we look like, I think that it's a really difficult thing to see that. And I mean, again, it's all interconnected. So we're kind of at home. We don't have a lot of people around us, even though they might be in a meeting. It's not physically around us. So we can feel isolated. This can lead to unhealthy habits, increased drinking, increased eating. And yeah, it has a direct impact on the way we see ourselves.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I am super triggered by video. Hence, I love the podcast.
I know.
And yeah, so being on video
Uh-huh.
so much overnight was a lot for me to process.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear I'm not the only
Right.
one. that was like,
I'm guilty
whoa.
of like shifting my computer to get the right lighting and everything like that.
Heck yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a real thing. There's been a heavy theme in our podcast episodes so far about just how interconnected everything is.
Right.
And I think that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Is that you potentially have one experience or you're triggered by something that
Right.
it creates some uneasiness or
Yes.
some self-doubt or am I good enough or is
Right.
this enough? And then it potentially creates this cascade of other
Yes.
distorted thoughts and then
Snowball.
that shapes your behavior.
Right. And we have a lot of time to think. I think more so being at home than we do in the office. And so that the overthinking can lead to kind of compulsive types of behaviors, just to alleviate those obsessive thoughts, which it just is what it is.
Mhm.
So, yeah, which can lead to that distorted body image and all sorts of other unhealthy conditions.
So I know you're really into geeking out about neuroscience.
Oh, yeah.
And this
Huge brain nerd over here.
This is our love language, Laura and I. So let's talk a little bit about that because
Right.
I think cognitive distortions or
Yes.
thinking in a way that is a little distorted that then shapes
Irrational.
yes, it kind of shapes your belief about yourself and others
Yeah.
and then that can kind of get you stuck again just
Yep.
believing something that may or may not be true
Right.
or
I love the phrase, just because you think it doesn't make it true.
yeah. I also say that if you tell yourself something long enough, you'll begin to believe it, whether it's true or not.
And you act it. Like how we behave is really how we think.
One that I've really noticed about myself is, and you and I have talked about this,
Yes.
is magnification and minimization.
Right.
So I'm just using this as an example because not everyone might know all the different cognitive distortions. I'll own that I do this. It's either exaggerating
Right.
things and kind of catastrophizing,
Yeah.
or it's taking something and minimizing it and making it really small.
Uh-huh.
And there are several others. But what I want to offer up and where I'm headed with this is that most people, I think, have these tendencies to, say something critical about
Yes.
themselves or to have a little bit of a warped perspective on something. And again, it's for infinite reasons why this
Yeah.
happens. But I think the important message that we can share with people is that even though if you're having those thought patterns, they can change.
Right.
And
We have
that's
the power to change.
and that's
how
what
we
you do
think.
for a living is you
Yeah.
help people to heal and to change.
Yeah. That's essentially what cognitive behavior therapy is all about, is really analyzing our thoughts so we can change our behavior.
And I think people, or I don't want to be too dramatic because I can be that way. My concern is that people feel stuck.
Yeah.
And if they've had,
I think that's the human condition. I think that's all like just what humans experience.
and so I think a powerful
Yeah.
message is just like our bodies adapt and change
Right.
when we focus on it, so can our thought patterns and the words we say to ourselves and all of that.
Right.
And because neuroscience has exploded in the last couple of decades, we know that the adult brain
Yes.
adapts. It's not
Yep.
just children's brains that are plastic.
Yep.
And,
Neuroplasticity is the term for
yeah.
being able to change your brain.
And we know that some of the work that we do with mindfulness and meditation, it changes the matter in the brain. So
Mhm.
I like to cast hope for people that we are never our final versions of ourselves.
Right.
Like our bodies and brains are always able to adapt if given the opportunity.
Mhm.
And I don't know that people feel that hopeful all the time.
Right.
And
But I always say that to change and to grow, it's going to feel uncomfortable. That's how we grow. Like we have to really analyze thoughts and feelings, and that can be in an uncomfortable situation or feel uncomfortable in the body, but that leads to growth. It's just like when we work out, like lift weights, we're breaking down the muscle fibers to make them stronger. So it's the same with mental well-being.
Yeah. Amen. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of these different themes that we've discussed, I'll do a quick rundown. Burnout, isolation, disconnection, feelings of guilt or shame, depression, anxiety, distorted body image. Oh, I left one off. There was another one you and I talked about. Permission.
Oh, this is huge.
Yeah. So I like what
Huge.
Brene Brown says about write yourself a permission slip.
Yes.
Write yourself a permission slip. We are so hard on ourselves, so give yourself permission to do things, to
Yes.
feel things. And that ties back to what you just said. What we're also seeing is, like we said, this guilt about stepping away from work or this guilt about taking a break stems from not giving yourself permission
Right.
to have that moment of self-care. And I think there's some permission confusion too within the workplace. Because what I hear is like managers, leaders, decision makers saying, man, we wish people engaged more. We wish people came to all these things that we're doing and hosting. And then on the flip side of that, the employee is saying, man, I don't feel like I can get away from my desk.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody wants the same thing, but they're not on the same page.
Yes.
So I think we have to be really explicit about permission. Like,
Yeah.
no, please go and take care of yourself. Please schedule your therapy appointment whenever you need it.
Yes.
Like, it's important.
And employees need to see employers doing that work too. So there was an example of a manager or supervisor going into a meditation pod, because some of our corporations have meditation pods, and people seeing him doing that so that they realize and recognize that they could also do the same.
Yeah. And there's confusion there sometimes too, though, because I've been a huge advocate of that, where I say leaders need to model self-care because it will give permission to others to do the same. And I really don't like the word permission, but it makes sense to people. So I think if they model it, it'll make it more safe or approachable. But then I've heard this limiting belief from people who say, well, I don't think that I have the same privileges as the CEO, or I don't have the same privileges as my boss. Like those people in higher positions, they get to have more flexibility. They get to.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'm like, no.
Right.
Yeah. So I think there can always be a little bit of confusion. And so, we can't assume that everybody feels encouraged to do things. It has to be, I think, really direct.
Yeah.
Lara, you talk a lot about being direct.
Yes.
And don't tap dance around things and assume that people are going to connect the dots.
Because it's also about expectations, and expectations have to be concise and clear to take away that confusion.
Yeah. Well, that leads to our next topic, which is uncertainty. Uncertainty is so tricky.
It is.
Because being a living, breathing creature, life is inherently uncertain.
Yes, and life is always changing.
Yeah. So it is what it is. And it's a characteristic of resiliency to be able to be at peace with a certain amount of uncertainty.
Roll with it.
Yeah, roll with it. We have that sign in our office.
Yeah.
So that's a positive skill set. But in the same sense, there is such a thing as too much of anything.
Right.
Right? So what we see in the workplace and the workday sometimes is like a heavy cloud of uncertainty, because maybe there's like a communication issue or there's a major decision brewing and people are waiting for what that means and how it impacts their workday and their life. And that kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because I think sometimes in the workday and workplace, there's unnecessary uncertainty. It's like life comes with enough. So can we kind of like control what we can?
Yes.
Is where Lara and I are headed, and where we try to go when we're talking to employers, know, like maybe not everything needs to be a big secret.
Right. No, and that's why I said that information is powerful, because people need to know what to expect. And that increases certainty. Going back to routine ritual alleviates anxiety. So there's a lot of basic things that we can do as organizations to really increase that level of certainty. And that increases the relaxation response. So, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether you're at work or you're at home, if you don't have enough information or enough pieces of the puzzle, the brain will make up a story, right?
Oh.
The brain will try.
You don't want that.
Yeah, the brain will try to fill in the gaps,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Oh, so-and-so didn't say hi to me.
Oh.
So I must have done something to piss them off. And you make up a story to make sense of the experience you're having and to fill in the gaps, right? And
we chuckle all the time because, Katie's my boss. So I'm like, Katie, when you emailed me, are you coming to the office tomorrow? I immediately freak out.
And so the story you told yourself is that I wanted you there. And that was not it. That was not it. But we're really good at making up stories.
Yeah.
And we've kind of started using this language in our team meetings too. Like the story I'm telling myself is X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Am I off base here? And then you might get a couple of chuckles like, yeah, nobody's upset. It's all good. So I think like the classic example I like to give is you get a cryptic email from someone that says, I need to talk to you at 4:00. And there is just not enough information to know what that means. Is it a good meeting? Is it a bad meeting? Is it, and I catastrophize. I go to worst case scenario as do many people.
Well, it's the way our brains function. It's called the negativity bias.
Yes.
Like our brains are wired
for threats.
For survival. This kept us alive during caveman years. And
yeah, so I try to coach people. I say, ask more questions. Like, help me to understand how I can prepare for our 4:00 meeting.
We also talk about the statement or the question, I wonder what's going on. I'm noticing.
Yeah. Laura talks a lot about this kind of spirit of curiosity.
Right.
And so I always encourage people, ask more questions, get more information, because otherwise your brain will attempt to forecast and sometimes we can be a little off base.
Right.
So when someone's having a moment of stress response in their bodies, what happens?
So our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking part of our brain, I call it going offline. It kind of shuts down, not completely, it just goes offline for a minute. And we function from our emotional part of our brain, which is the limbic system. So this activates the amygdala, and the amygdala is our alarm system in the brain. It's helpful because it helps keep us safe and alerts us to threats. But when it goes into overdrive, it can automatically initiate the fight-flight response, which is that stress response. And then we experience anxiety and we're unable to kind of regulate the body.
So at the end of the day, there's this whole cascade
of
events in the body and in the mind, and then we wonder why we're having trouble focusing.
Yeah.
That's like another major theme is ability to focus.
And making decisions. It is incredibly hard if we're stressed or experiencing fight or flight to make decisions, even basic ones.
Oh, decision-making fatigue. I joke all the time. People can't decide what to have for dinner.
Right.
Because they're done.
Yes.
And especially as a small business owner, I get to 8:00 and I am like, I am done.
That's why DoorDash is my love.
When in doubt, Laura orders soup.
I do love a good soup. Has to be cream-based, though.
We have a little inside joke there. Okay. So with that, we could go on, and I've already taken us down a few paths that I didn't really intend to.
That's
but
so great.
I think it's important to be conversational, and I think it's important to work organically.
Yes.
That said, I've asked Laura to make some targeted recommendations about how to support mental health directly within the workday. I think this is where there is some, ironically, uncertainty that employers say, yes, we want to do more, let's do more. They get to yes on this is important. Everybody, I think, culturally has gotten to yes that we need to do more and better for mental health.
Right.
But then I think where it gets tricky is the how. So where do you want to take us next with that?
Well, I think we have to focus on the basics to start. Again, focusing on that routine. How do we communicate to employees and associates, setting a really enriching routine for themselves? Relationships. relationships is such a key factor that it bridges all of the theoretical perspectives in therapy. We have to get to know each other. And it's not like, I'm going to say, icebreakers and getting to know you activities increases anxiety. It's not about that. It's about getting to know each other on a personal basis. How do we do that? Again, with saying within those limits and those boundaries, we need that. Social support is a critical intervention and support strategy. So getting to know each other, focus on regulation. So regulation is all about how to increase just self-control. How do we manage our thoughts and feelings and behaviors? And it's so individualized that we need to talk about what that looks like. A lot of it has to do with sensory input, so focusing on the senses. I like to say there's a lot of grounding activities of just feeling your feet on the floor, your body in your chair. There's so many basic things that we can teach our employees, and I feel like that needs to happen.
Okay. Let's take a little bit of time here.
Yes.
Because this is where I think people get uncomfortable.
Right.
And I think it does make a case for hiring us.
Yes.
Because people will say, can you come in and do that? But it does make, I think, those who are leading or facilitating meetings, they might feel uncomfortable having a mindfulness moment or leading a conversation.
Yeah.
That's vulnerable or what have you. And so that's tricky. I mean, I think anything that we do with consistency, we build
you have
capacity and confidence.
Yeah.
But if you just avoid it your whole career, it's not going to get less uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think an important message for us today, too, is to just try. Try to lead your meetings a little bit differently or more intentionally, or try one new thing for your teams and see how they respond.
Even hand fidgets. I know that we joke all the time about like adult hand fidgets, like how to give somebody some clay and see what happens.
Well, this is so funny. We did a Spirit Week activity with some of our clients last week, and one day was all about creativity and thinking outside the box. And we put out a doodle challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And just asked people to draw. And we gave them starter lines and said, what can you, like you would do with children in art class. Like, what would you draw?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what if that was a thing in your meetings? Like there were markers and papers and, everybody just take 5 minutes and like doodle for a minute.
Yeah.
But we talk a lot about the power of sensory experiences.
Right.
And again, sometimes if you're asking people to share or do an icebreaker type thing, they might actually be coming out of their skin a little bit.
Right.
They're not going to have that grounded.
I literally hide in the bathroom. All icebreakers. And I'm a mental health specialist.
Well, I'm leading an icebreaker activity later this week for a client, but I've already prepared for how I'm going to help everybody to not freak out before we do it.
And I think the power of humor needs to be talked about because laughter alleviates so many feelings of like negativity. It also helps with connectedness. I always joke around when we talk about regulation that there are several things that regulate me, including coffee. I literally will drink 2 pots of coffee a day. I'm not recommending that as a healthy habit, but that's just, I'm doing me, and that's what helps.
She must metabolize it very well because she's not like swinging off the ceiling right now.
No, not at all. Dogs, talking about dogs, petting my dog, that's regulating. Beyonce. And I use this all the time in my trainings because music is so powerful, but what works for me might not work for other people. But find what works best for you. And I think that that's a takeaway for employers and leaders is that they need to talk about this and do so in a humorous way because people want to be lighthearted. They want to have that break during the day where you can laugh and connect and this is one of the ways to do it is talking about mental health and things like this. We can make this conversation lighthearted because it is such a serious conversation. And I think that that's very important is that just because this is a serious topic doesn't mean we have to do so in a depressed way.
Yeah. Well, and you and I talk a lot about the fact that people people may have a common goal.
Yeah.
So say the goal in the workday or the meeting is to help people to feel grounded.
Yes.
Or to help people to feel relaxed or to help people feel refreshed.
Mm-hmm.
So we all might have the same goal of having this positive experience or emotion.
Right.
But how people get to that will look different.
So different.
So one person might say, yeah, give me the doodle exercise. The other person might say, hey, give me a tactile hand fidget. Somebody
Yes.
else might say, throw me the aromatherapy. I need some lavender. Someone else might go do jumping jacks to wake up. And I might dance and she might have Beyonce on. So
yes.
I think we have to give, like you talk about controlled choice. Like,
yes.
hey, everybody, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Here are some ways you can take care of yourself. And you're not forcing everybody to do the same thing necessarily, but giving them options.
Yes. Options are empowering. And they also set limits. So if you only have a controlled number of options, you feel secure because limits help people feel secure.
Yeah, some people get overwhelmed.
Oh, totally.
And they'll say like, "Oh, I'm not a fast processor. Like I can't decide."
Right.
Yeah.
And it's empowering. And I know it's again, going back to the basics, choices are so simple, but they're so empowering.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we could go on and on and on. So we'll probably do a part deux or part trois. That's the only French I speak.
I love it. I'm so happy I come back.
Yes. So before we kind of wind things down, I promised that we would touch on psychological safety. That probably sounds like a lot to unpack when people hear it for the first time. So what does it mean to create psychological safety?
Well, it's essentially a shared belief that people can make mistakes at work and share ideas without feeling humiliated or
judged.
Yeah. And that, again, going back to the safe place, this is a safe place to be creative, to just throw out wild ideas and not be judged and criticized, definitely not punished. I've seen that in organizations where somebody has an idea and they're punished for it. So yeah, it's all that fostering openness and being vulnerable to share because, sharing can be very vulnerable sometimes.
Yeah, I was reading quite a bit about that over the weekend. It's really about taking a risk and putting yourself out there.
Right.
So
because like a healthy risk. And that's how we learn. That's how we grow is taking healthy risks.
Right. But I can see how you might be in a situation where every idea you suggest or anything you share about yourself gets shut down.
Right.
Or somebody has a comment that could really create a toxic workplace.
Yes. And it's not about being nice to each other all the time. It's not about getting along all the time. I mean, conflict can be a really healthy thing to move people forward if they do so in a healthy way, in a supportive way.
I think that's the tough part.
Yeah.
Is that we are emotional beings.
Yes.
And so when the emotional side of the brain is full throttle, conversations can go south.
Right. And that's why regulating and taking a breather, taking a pause, there's a ton of research out there on the power of the pause. And that's something we could probably talk about in greater detail of how powerful that is and what it does to the brain and body so we can make a healthy decision.
It's so interesting to me because there's the power of the pause and then there's also the 5-second rule.
Right. Right.
But it depends on what your goal is.
Yes.
So if your goal is to self-regulate in the sense that you need to calm down and steady yourself.
Yes.
The recommendation is to pause.
Yeah.
So that you can process the emotion.
And get your prefrontal cortex back online.
Okay.
Being able to think. Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, you might choose your words differently.
Right.
More mindfully.
Yes.
You might be able to come up with those direct statements or I statements or questions. And I shouldn't have even brought up the 5-second rule, but that's more for people that can't get going.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get themselves doing new positive
Geared
habits.
up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a benefit in a pause. And I joke that sometimes it's a 5-minute pause.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a 5-hour pause.
Right.
And sometimes I need 5 days. I'm so pissed off I need 5 days.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And that's where we have to have that opportunity. So we need to be encouraged to do that. Of let's table this conversation and come back to it.
Yeah. And I've heard you say that a safe workplace is also characterized by this sense of or this common belief of I've got your back and you've got mine.
Yes.
Like you don't have to worry that when you walk out of the room, somebody's going to,
Right.
Be talking about you or judging you.
Yeah. It's a felt sense too. It's not necessarily cognitive. It's just how we feel inside, and not necessarily an emotion, but just an overall general kind of climate.
I like that word.
Yeah.
It's got to feel good to go to work and be like, yeah, my boss has my back.
Yes.
Like even if I make a mistake, they help me learn through it, grow through it. And
because we're human, we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
So
That's really powerful.
yeah.
So I know there are a few really targeted things to encourage
Mm-hmm.
in efforts to get people feeling more safe and secure in the workplace and workday. I
Right.
recall you saying once that embrace all ideas, even the wild ones.
Yes. Right.
So share a little bit more about how to create a positive, safe, secure culture.
It's about listening really to the thoughts and the feelings. And again, accepting all that comes your way. It's not that you have to choose all those things, but just be open. It's about openness and connectedness, of having that sense of being a team. And so I think that that's essential of really fostering that, like that we.
Yeah, and I hear groups say things like innovation is a core value.
Right.
Or they really want to do things, again, outside the box, think outside the box, that type of thing. But then I think people feel conflicted because innovation is potentially the value. And so they put things out into the world or speak things out like, hey, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And then they're met with, oh, no, can't do that. We've never done that before.
Right. Right.
So what do people do in those situations where there's a disconnect between the values that have been stated and then the day-to-day?
Well, and that's tricky because you could consider that kind of gaslighting when you have a employer or a leader say, hey, we're going to have this wellness program, we're going to have these options, we're going to have all these things to increase that safety, but then the day-to-day does not look safe. So when there's that dissidence, then the employee is like, then something must be wrong with me. And then that brings on shame and guilt. So we have to be mindful that when we communicate these things, we follow through. And it has to be felt on a day-to-day. Not that you have to have big celebrations on a day-to-day, but it's about listening and hearing and valuing people.
Awesome. So this is really good. We've been talking about some considerations for the workplace and the workday so that people feel more seen, more safe, more secure.
Right.
Little healthier climate. I like the word climate that you used.
Yes.
I've also heard you use the word toxic.
Yes.
So,
because that's real. I mean, a toxic workplace, it does happen.
Yeah, I had an employee share with me that one of her previous employers would scream at people. And I said, she'd scream at people? Like, have I ever screamed at someone at work? I'm like, I don't think I have.
Right.
Like, that's a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's one thing to be aware, right? Like, this is a really positive workplace climate. This is a concerning workplace climate. Or this feels unsafe. This feels secure. I feel like nobody sees or notices or acknowledges me. But then I think it's that how that gets a little tricky.
Yes.
So are there any final thoughts you want to share about how people can use a little bit of agency to express themselves? Because what do we do when it is a toxic environment?
That's the ultimate question, right? It's like, I really do think it has a top-down effect. Like, things have to start from the top.
Sure.
Or there has to be enough at the bottom kind of speaking up. And that, again, is a scary thing for people.
Yeah, so it sounds like it does.
It has to be systemic.
It takes courage.
Yes.
To maybe be that contributor in a toxic place that takes a risk.
Yeah.
Is a little vulnerable and says like, "Hey, I'm really concerned."
Yeah.
About my ability to work here, or
Right.
I'm really concerned about.
And we're seeing that, right? It's the great resignation. Like people are leaving. And so employers, they need to listen.
Well, and
I believe
unfortunately,
they are.
the worry is like, is it too late?
Right.
So I think what I'm hearing is be an advocate for yourself in
Yes.
whatever way you feel empowered to do so, but know that it is a systemic issue. And we kind of talked about that with engagement too.
Yeah.
It's not like you do one thing and it works
Right.
100% of the time.
Right.
There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of
Yes.
things to consider. And I think with many things in the workplace and the workday, people are aware of a problem or a challenge and they're looking for that quick fix. And it's like, really, it is a systemic
Yes.
cultural fix.
Yeah.
And a lot of big conversations have to happen
Right,
to,
right,
to
right.
own it
Yeah.
too, like to acknowledge it. But
Right.
but what we've seen, especially in the latest research that you and I were looking at, is just this idea of openness and
Right.
acceptance
Yes.
and acknowledging things as they are.
Yeah. Even the
Oddly.
scary, like fearful stuff of being like, yep, we say a lot or we talk a lot about naming it to tame it.
Mm-hmm.
Like just say, hey, this is it. So this is going to help me tame whatever experience I'm going through.
And I think on the employer side, it's powerful to take responsibility
Yes.
and to just say like, hey, that didn't get handled great.
Yes. We have to be okay with admitting our mistakes or when things didn't go well. You know, we do that a lot as parents. I think that that's a sign of, it's called corrective action when you acknowledge like, hey, it didn't go well. And then, because we're not perfect, nobody's perfect, but we need to be aware. It's about increasing awareness as well of when things don't go well and when we hurt people emotionally. I think that that's critical because burnout can change somebody's identity, which is like fascinating to me as a mental health specialist, that work can actually change you as a person. And so we need to do everything in our power where that doesn't happen.
Ooh, okay.
So good.
Yeah, I mean, I say this all the time. People are at work more than anywhere else.
Yes.
On most days of the week. So it really is, I think, a game changer when someone loves where they work.
Speaking from personal experience.
When they love where they work, they feel seen, they feel safe, they feel secure,
Yep.
they feel cared about.
Yes.
Such a game changer. And again, all of this does have that benefit to the system.
Yes.
I really like the word system because I
Yeah.
think in life it's easy to get pigeonholed and to personalize things and think it's a me issue. And it's like, no, you're one piece of the system and we all need to work together to get to the goal and the greater
Yeah.
good. So anyways, this has been an awesome conversation. I think we ran a little longer than usual, but that's okay. I think it was time well spent and we'll do it again in the near future. So thank you for being
so
here today.
much. Thank you for having me. This was amazing.
Thanks.
Yes.
That's a wrap.